Howdy, Hayley, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Maddie?
I am grand. Welcome back, everyone, to episode 2. Can you believe it? We're podcast moguls now. Of
Experts.
Exactly, we're coming for you, Stephen Bartlett. It is episode 2 of Coffee Isn't Lunch. And if you joined us for last week's episode, you will remember that we ended with our current hyperfocus because me and Hayley both have ADHD. So we thought, what a wonderful thing that we can talk about today. If that's okay with you, Hayley.
Yes, I love talking about ADHD.
Fabulous. I believe we have, as always, there's a caveat, there's a nuance. Will you hit us with it?
I felt it was important to start this episode off by saying we're going to talk about ADHD and we're going to talk about our experience. And I want people to know that we don't think our experience is everybody's experience. I think it's really important to say that because I see it a lot when people talk about ADHD. Sometimes they talk about it with such authority, and people really sometimes think that their experience is everybody's. And I think ADHD is wild and varied, and not everybody has all the same symptoms. Some people need more support than others, etc., etc. And in the main, we're going to talk about our experience today. Although I have done some ADHD training recently, so I may throw in a bit of stuff that I've learned if it seems relevant. But that's the
Fabulous.
caveat, Maddie. Carry
Yeah,
on.
I think that's really important. Totally agree. So I'll um I'll just kind of share just so people have a bit of context. I'll share a little bit about my kind of journey and timeline. So I was diagnosed with ADHD in early 2021. Um my journey was like incredibly fast, like whiplash breakneck speed fast. So I probably were like loads of people started to see quite a lot of content around it. The algorithm was like, hey, you keep buying stuff or you keep getting obsessed with things or whatever it was that the algorithm knows. It knew me. And it started giving me things like, it might be ADHD. And I had like never, ever, ever considered this for me because I guess when you have these traits, you just think, well, everyone has them, especially if you have them in your family as well. So I was chatting to a family member of mine because I was asking about like what I was like when I was little, and that's part of the diagnostic process as well. And this family member said, well, the funny thing is they went, oh no, that's not ADHD. We're all like that. I thought, oh, I've got news for you. And then and then they said that another family member of mine had just been diagnosed, and that family member is a psychotherapist. I thought, okay, I trust this person's opinion immensely. So I went on the phone, and as always, our conversation was about 14 hours long, and it was a bit of a penny drop. And she kindly recommended her psychiatrist. I was in a very lucky position to be able to go through that privately. And even then, and this is before, I guess, like, I don't want to say like the boom of ADHD, but just this big shift in people. It's more visible and more people kind of realizing, I guess, that they've got it or that it might be, something to think about. It was kind of just before that. I think timing for me was incredibly lucky, and being lucky to go private. And yeah, I got in touch with hers, and she just did it over Zoom. But even then, I was told, no, you're going to be waiting about 3 months for an appointment. And I said, oh, could you put me on a, funnily enough, can you put me on a wait list, please? And she said, oh, we very rarely get wait list spaces come up. I got a call the next day. Can you do an appointment tomorrow? So
Yes.
my journey was like 4 or 5 days long, barely any time to, even gather my thoughts. And, you do like pre-questionnaire. So there was like a kind of shorter questionnaire then before the actual appointment that we had on Zoom. There was like a longer one. Talks a lot about something that I don't like is that it talks a lot about your impact on other people, more so than how it impacts yourself. So it was like, how did this impact your relationships and, in your jobs and in education and such. And it kind of asks you to ask people who've known you throughout your life and things like this. And honestly, within about 30 seconds, because I'd sent all of that beforehand, she was like, yeah, you've got ADHD. She's a psychiatrist, so she was able to prescribe, and I was prescribed with meds. And that's, in a nutshell, my sort of journey with it in regards to diagnosis. I'd love to know what yours is, because yours is a bit more recent, isn't it?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed in May this year, 2023.
Yeah.
And Well, it's a funny story, Maddie, how I decided I had ADHD, isn't it?
Tell me more.
And so I think we'd been friends. How long? Like a year?
About, yeah, something like that, where we'd been really chatting like pretty much every day at that point, yeah.
Yeah, we'd been friends for about a year. And essentially, Maddie said to me one day, I think you've got ADHD, Aileen. And I literally, and my reaction was not offended. I was kind of amused, and I just was like, do you?
Yeah.
And what I think, and it never occurred to me in a million years. And what's kind of funny, Maddie, is when I was a therapist, I specialised in young people. And there was a period of time where I worked in a sixth form college. So all my clients were 16 to 19. And what ended up happening was I noticed that I would say the majority of the kids that were coming to speak to me were neurodiverse. This is what was panning out.
Yeah.
And I remember literally saying to my friend, oh, I feel really lucky that I'm not neurodiverse. It's really hard for these kids.
Yeah.
Some of them are really struggling. And me and my friend were going, yeah, because she was a therapist in a school as well. And consequently, the pair of us have both been diagnosed since then. Yeah. And I just think it's so bizarre how even knowing I knew more about autism, to be honest, than ADHD. I just didn't see it in myself. And I think it's because, similar to what you said when your family member said, now we're all like that. I think I work in an industry. Well, obviously I'm not hairdressing anymore, but I'm still in the industry and I was. I think it's pretty prevalent in our industry. And I think a lot of my friends are creatives. And so we're all the same.
Yeah.
And so I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? When your friends are all excitable and creative.
Yeah.
Why would you feel that you were different?
It's like normalizing that. Yeah, like...
Yeah, I mean, do you remember what you said to me, Maddie, though? Because I said to you, why do you think that?
It was... So I kind of noticed that your processes were really similar to mine, as in, like, the way that your brain process information, like I call it like the threads. It's a bit like my psychiatrist said to me, it's like wet spaghetti. So I was telling her about how a year previous or 6 months previous, I'd hired in into the business, and he is neurotypical, very much so. And I talked about how I tried to explain my processes to him. Like one of them was like how to reconcile on QuickBooks. And I was like, okay, well, you do this, and that means you have to go here, and this is in an email, and this is here, and that's written on the back of a post-it note or whatever. And he was just like, what on earth is this? But to me, it just made like the most perfect sense ever. And there was just so many similarities, like our love of paper and post-its, even though it makes more sense to, how many times have we went, if we should have put this on a doc, which we're getting really good at doing now, but we'll often write things on paper, and then we'll like transfer them onto docs. We're really good with like deadlines. We can hold a conversation that's actually like 5 different conversations and follow it completely and pull back the different threads. Like that's for me like a really big indicator. And I think you're right. I think people are attracted to people like friendship wise who are similar. And I also think it must be bloody hard work being a neurotypical in a group of neurodiverse people, because you must just be thinking like, what on earth is this conversation? Like, what's going on?
Lot.
Yeah, but for us, it's fine. Like, we're on 2 speed all the time, constant.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. Basically, what happened was you said this to me, and I was just like, really? And I remember you giving me your examples as to why. And I said, is everyone not like that? And you were like, no. And I thought, oh, I just thought this was normal. And so me being me, I hyper-focused. I got obsessed and I read a lot about it, and I thought, oh, I totally have. And I remember saying to my best mate, who's a therapist, I think I've got ADHD, and she started laughing and was like, oh, of course you have. Of course you have. It was like, she was like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah, and so it's so funny. And so I was pretty convinced, but I really didn't get diagnosed for a while though, because I just wasn't sure if I was going to. I wasn't sure what the benefits to that would be even. And then I decided to put myself on the NHS waiting list. and just see what happened. I thought, I'm in no rush.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten this far without any sort of help. And then it was a bit like, once I knew that I did, it became more screamingly obvious
Yeah.
that what was hard was hard.
Yeah.
And I thought, this doesn't have to be this way. You know, and I was talking to you, and obviously you were taking meds and seeing a difference. And so, and I was talking to a couple of other people in the industry, and a couple of people were quite anti-meds and not very interested. They were like, no, I want a diagnosis, but I'm not interested in meds. And then somebody said to me, messaged me and said, Hayley, I took the meds, game changer. And I just thought, I need to speed this process up. I'd been on the waiting list 18 months at this point.
Wow.
And so I decided to go private. And literally, like, I got they offered me an appointment the next day, and I kicked it down the road 2 more days because I was busy. And it was pretty much the same as you. But what's interesting about what you were saying was they ask everyone their experience with you. And, you know, I'm not married. I don't live with anyone. There was no one really to ask. I think people don't see how I struggle with stuff. They see the end result.
100%.
You know, and if my energy is low, I don't go out, so people don't see me. So people see the more hyperactive side of me.
Yeah.
And so there's not a lot of people who've been witness to it, you know.
Yeah.
And my family are just like, you were good. You were a good kid. You did well in school.
Yeah. Same.
And so just can't really, it's difficult for them to sort of fill in those forms because they're a bit like, I don't know what this is all about.
Yeah.
So in the end, a friend of mine who I'd known for 10 years filled it in.
Yeah.
Because she's probably someone who's more privy to the struggle. She's who I would talk to about what I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
And so she was good for that. And my psychiatrist was recommended to me. And he said to me, you've got a lot of coping strategies, Hayley, but it's definitely there. And
yeah,
I was
just thinking that, like, I think sometimes either the people around you or even yourself, you don't know because, like you say, up until that point, you're like, well, I thought this was normal and I thought just everyone had to do this and everyone struggled with, like, so the massive thing for me is like executive dysfunction, this whole almost like I've got no manager in my brain. It's just everyone's just running riot and there's no one there going, we need to do this, we need to prioritize this. Or I know fine well what I need to do, but I just have like zero motivation to do it. And then there's like the self-critical, like, why can't you do this simple task? It's really easy, you know, it'll make your life easier and all of that stuff. But something that happened to me really soon after my diagnosis, because a lot of people will be thinking, do I need one? Especially if you're not in a position to pay and get one private, or you're on this really long wait list. And I'd love to know your thoughts as well on kind of how you felt about getting diagnosed. But for me, it was all that happened in the weeks after was I kind of just like kept thinking of all of these things in my past, in my life, through this new lens, as if I put these glasses on and I was like, this makes so much sense. So I had like a mixture of kind of compassion and you know, giving that person grace, but also feeling really sad that at the time it was, you know, very much neurotypical expectations. And I remember I found a school report from a Spanish teacher and I read it. It's from secondary school. And I was like, how did no one know? Because this, if you read that now, just textbook, like distracts others, like there was this frustration in my education because I did well in school, but I did well in subjects that I really enjoyed. And it was this frustration from my teachers that they were like, you are so capable, but you just we can't engage you if you're not interested. And then you'll go and kind of distract and talk to everyone else. And I think that's something that I have now, which is great. It's helped me in loads of ways. But I honestly think my level of capability is like 100 times what I'd ever expect from anyone else, which is awful. Like I would never, ever hold someone else to those standards of like what they're capable of doing. But for me, I'm like, well, I can. And it's not like a weird, I don't think like a narcissist way, but like I know that if I'm operating on like 10% and I can make that work, I think bloody hell, imagine if I could get to like 50% or, you know, 100%. But
all of that, I agree.
And shortly after, Aidan had said, like, he was like, I don't mean this in a nasty way. He said, but I feel like your ADHD's become more prevalent, like not like leaning into it, but like it's more apparent. And I was like, yeah, because the masks, it was a total mask before. I think you realise how much you just hid or didn't talk about or that you minimised. just to try and I guess fit in or not. I don't know. And I don't know. I wonder if that happened for you. How did you feel actually post diagnosis?
Relieved was my
Mm,
main feeling, because I
okay.
just thought, if it's not that, what is it?
Yeah.
Like, am I just lazy? Am
Mm-hmm.
I chronically fatigued?
Mm-hmm.
Because the one of the big things I struggle with is energy levels, and so I'm on or off, and I've
Same. Yeah.
always been like that. I'm on or I'm off, and when I'm on, I'm on. But
Yeah.
Maddie, when I'm off, I'm off.
Yeah.
You know, and then I learned about this thing called I'm going to get the name wrong now. It's something like low sensory registration.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was doing the training, and I said, I feel like the less I do, the less I do.
Mm,
And they said, oh, that's exactly what that is. If the stimulus isn't enough, I don't wake up.
yeah.
Like, I can't get going.
Yeah.
And so that's how I've always felt. It's like I can't get going and then I can't stop.
Yeah.
And that's my constant struggle, really. And I just thought, if it's not ADHD, how am I going to manage that forever? Because it's
Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah.
I think people think about it as bouncing off the walls with hyperactivity, and I can be like that once I get going, but actually it's like wading through treacle most of the time to get stuff
Yeah.
done. And so I felt really relieved. And I had a really interesting thought, actually, when I thought about younger me,
Mm,
because I was I'm pleased in hindsight I wasn't diagnosed as a young person, because I'm not sure that would have panned out that well,
mm-hmm.
based on, well, I probably would never have been, but I feel like the stigma was more, because
Yeah.
I'm 48, this would have been, if I'd have been diagnosed as a teenager, we're looking 30 years ago.
It's like
I
unheard
feel
of.
like the
Yeah.
stigma around that and the support I would have got would have been zero anyway.
True. Yeah. I agree.
And I wonder what the compassion would have been like when people don't know much about it. Whereas I feel like now's not a bad time to get diagnosed,
Yeah.
because people know more about it and I know more about it. And I feel like I know myself enough that I'm not embarrassed about it. It's not something I keep a secret.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I kind of felt a bit like that. I was like, no, this is the time.
Yeah.
This is when I need it. Because also, when I was behind the chair, the motivation wasn't a problem, because those people just kept coming in.
Yeah. It's
And
not
so,
well. It's like novelty, isn't it? My psychiatrist said she went. I think there will be a lot of people in your industry with ADHD because it is such a great industry for us to work in. I always say I'm pretty unemployable. Like how anyone ever got me working. I used to start at 7 a.m. in a call center, which is wild.
yeah,
I guess paying bills is a pretty good motivation. Um, but yeah, it's great because it's novelty, like a new client in the door. We get to be creative. Um, we're talking to people, we're having conversations. You have to think on your feet. So it really, we're entrepreneurial, which I think is one of the really great bits for me about it. Creative thinkers, really independent a lot of the time. So she was just like, there will be a lot of you in here. And I think
mm-hmm.
that's why we maybe see, for us even more so, like more and more people in our world talking about it. And I don't think it is because it's like, oh, it's a fad or it's cool or whatever. I genuinely think like for me it just made sense. It made sense that my entire career path was exactly as it was. It made sense that I didn't go to
Mm-hmm.
uni because I was like, I'm a hell sitting through a lecture, like that would be hell for me. Or writing dissertation would be like my worst nightmare.
Oh, I mean, I can't even bear typing. I literally can't bear typing. That's why I voice note everyone.
Yeah, like my thing was always very active, like physical jobs, creative jobs, and things like that were really good for me. I think we've talked a little bit about like the harder parts, but I do want to kind of touch on the good bits and just back to what you said about the being diagnosed later. I completely agree with you, and I think I don't think I would be where I am if I didn't have the good parts, and maybe if I was diagnosed really early, I don't think I'd have, I guess, been able to explore the good parts, if that makes sense to you, because I maybe would have
Yeah,
just been like, medicated and. But actually, I think there's some. I don't love it when people say it's a superpower for me. Like if that's your
I
jam,
don't.
not my thing.
I don't. I
um,
think it's quite offensive to a lot of people who are
yeah,
struggling.
Yeah, because this, like, the struggle is really real. Like I say, when you can't do like simple tasks, when everything piles up and there's no motivation. And like you say, I feel exactly the same. I'm like 1 or 100.
Yeah.
There's just no in between usually for me.
Mm-hmm.
But the good parts, like, although my brain's really noisy for the most part and it doesn't stop ever, and there's like 15 million things, I'm really, really grateful that it comes up with ideas all of the time. Like, that's been, great for being great in business, where, I can't go to a shop without going, okay, this is business. What are they doing? How could we make this better? What can we learn? How can I help other people? How can I, what can I get from this?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been able to turn that into a career, and like, I am really grateful for that. And again, just like that energy, I think that translates into being able to G other people up really well, like, very motivational to other people. People for the most part say they like to be in like around that level of like high energy and stuff. Probably for some people it's a nightmare.
For some people
But
in small doses.
yeah, small doses. But I'd love to know, are there any bits of that for you, like the kind of the bits that you think, actually, yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, I think I'm quite an out of the box thinker, and I think I'm a good problem solver, particularly for other people.
Yeah, so.
Which I think is a great why I really like what I do now, which is coaching people who are burnt out, is because I can sort of see creative solutions
Yeah.
that are not always the norm. There's a thing people have, some people have with ADHD, and I definitely have it. It's called roaming and homing thinking.
Ooh,
And
tell me
so
more.
I've always had this. I know I've always had this because it's been commented on. I can walk into a situation, assess it all very, very quickly, and then home in on what needs fixing.
Yes. Oh my
Like
God.
I have,
Hard
do you have
relate.
that?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I have this. Now I've always had this, and I remember my therapist said your brain is a blessing and a curse, Hayley. She
Yeah.
didn't know I had
Yeah.
ADHD at the time. Since then, she's been diagnosed, and me. I mean, I know I heard down the grapevine she got a diagnosis. It's just really funny. But she used to say, "You're very resourceful, Hayley. I've never really met anyone quite as resourceful as you."
Yeah.
And I think that's the ADHD, is coming
Yeah.
up with creative solutions that I can bear.
Problem
Because sometimes
solving.
the
Yeah.
solution, yeah, people do it this way. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
And so it's always got to be stimulating enough for me to want to care. And
Yeah.
I think it's very stimulating for me to solve problems,
I think
particularly
as
for other
well,
people.
we're really good in a crisis, because for us, we are like, yes, dopamine, deadline, immediate problem solving. Like, I have to come up with something, like, that's, and in an annoying way, we almost have to create mini crises to be like, let's write an
Yes.
email. I'm gonna, set myself a deadline or whatever. But yeah, I think we're great in a crisis. Really good people to have, really good problem solvers. And yeah, it's our creative brain, isn't it? I call it Fantasia brain. The scene where everything like becomes magic and everything's dancing around. Like, that's when I get into that mode, or like almost like the Cinderella dress. It's like this kind of,
Yeah.
me and you sometimes call it brain magic, don't we? Where we say,
Yeah. The
it's
magic's
here,
happening.
let's do all of our stuff, and then we'll start to go, yeah, it's starting to go. And that's when the energy kind of, we lose
It
it.
starts to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
So what are
I was going to say something else
yeah,
then, but it's gone out
it's
of my
gone.
ADHD brain. I
That's
don't know
one of
what
the
it
bad
was. I'm
bits.
sure it was brilliant. Oh, I was going to say this.
Oh yeah.
I like doing, what I like about it is my capacity to be good on the fly.
Oh my God, yes.
That's why I like doing lives.
I love lives. Everyone thinks that we're absolute freaks of nature, because my favorite content creation is going live. And most people
and I like
would,
people ask me questions and I don't want to know what they are beforehand.
same. I love panels.
Love it.
I'm like, don't tell me
panels.
before. I don't want
Oh,
to think about it. Podcast.
I don't. People say this to me all the time. Do you want to be sent the questions? Absolutely not.
No way.
No,
Just ask me,
it's
and I'll
so
come up with the magic.
stimulating for my brain to think of these answers, and people get the answers they get from me are so much better when I don't know the questions in advance.
Yeah. And I think when we work with clients one-to-one as well, this really shows up, where they come to us, talking through their challenges, and we can together with them like explore really creative solutions. And again, yeah, it's this, I love that roaming and home, and like that shows up so much in our coaching, I think, with our clients, of assessing the big picture, then going, we think it's this, and it's often not the thing that they think it is.
This is the route. This is what you need to do first. You're focusing in here. You need to focus here.
Yeah, it is. It is the magic, and like the bits that suck really suck. I'm really pleased for us that we have our diagnosis. I know meds was a thing for us that we wanted to do, and they help us. And I'm grateful for the good bits, while also acknowledging that the hard bits are very, very hard for us and for other people. We've touched a little bit on... I can't even
imagine what it must be like to be neurotypical, Maddie, can you?
No.
I just like, well, how do their brains work?
Well, I remember when I was in... It was kind of between the lockdowns, so I was kind of busier with Boss Your Salon, and I hired an office. I worked in an office with my friend, and it was my friend Aidan and me. And I was like, how can you just sit for 8 hours and work? I was like, I'm going to rearrange the furniture. I'm going to put this stuff on the wall. Oh, I found some Post-it notes. There's a colourful thing. I'm going to listen to a podcast. I'm bored of that. I'm going to do this. And I think witnessing that was really like, okay, my way of doing things is not everyone's. It was helpful. Very confusing. We've touched a little bit on coping strategies. I think that we should maybe go into that in a bit more depth anyway, in maybe another episode where we can dive into that. But I'd love to know, are there any like kind of fun ones, or kind of anything that helps you with ADHD that we can just drop in as like a wanna?
I still do this now, but not as much since the meds, but I do lean on it on tough days. But before, this was something that really worked for me. I used to have little rewards throughout the day. I used to be like, I'll do this for an hour and I'll reward myself with something. And I used to reward myself with like a sitcom. So something like Modern Family. Amazing. Like, those little 20-minute funny things, there's loads of them around, isn't there? But Modern Family was probably the last one, or like Arrested Development, some familiar comedy.
We're literally watching that now. We've just restarted because we finished The Office and we're back to Arrested Development. We just cycle through the same like big
I love Arrested Development. It's so good, isn't it? And so that's what I would do. I'd do like an hour or two. I'll do this job and then I'll watch an episode of that for 20 minutes. And I think it was stimulate. What I know now is there's actually a name for this, where it's, I can't remember the name of it right now, but
ADHD.
It stimulates that dopamine so you can carry on.
Yeah.
Or even looking forwards. And it's, And so small rewards.
Yeah, I love
consistently.
That.
Because if I said something like I'm going to work for 8 hours and then watch a film, I'm just going to fail after a couple of hours. And then I'm going to feel bad about myself.
Yeah. And I know there's loads of researchers, some amazing people like in the space, like writing stuff and doing podcasts and whatnot. And something that I learned, which changed things a bit for me, was that dopamine's not about, because we're just hunting dopamine. That's like, I guess, if you can nutshell, for me anyway, for ADHD, is like, we just love it. But it's not a reward. People used to think it was a reward, but it's not. It's the waiting. It's the anticipation of the reward. So by giving yourself the rewards, it's not even about when you get it. It's this is coming. If I do this thing, then I'm going to get this. And that regenerates, I guess, the dopamine. Mine.
Did you know that we don't actually, our receptors are not very good?
Yeah.
Our dopamine receptors.
We have to just try and get as much as possible.
So even when it's there, we're like, I can't find it.
Not enough. I'm like,
it's going to be massive.
Like when I jumped out of a plane, that's the level of like what I'm looking for, which was savage. Mine, and for those of you who are watching, you can watch us, by the way, on Coffee Isn't Lunch Unfiltered, also on YouTube. But I'm holding up a teeny tiny pink timer. And Aidan got me this kind of as a joke, but actually I love it. And you just set a timer, because one of the things we learned with my toddler brain in the office was, if there was a timer, not even a reward, just literally the sight of a timer just makes me jump into action. So if I couldn't be asked to write, let's say, an email, you go, how long do you need to write it? I'll say, give me 10 minutes. You go, there's 10 minutes on the clock. Nothing would happen if I didn't write it, but I was like, oh my God, it's a countdown timer, like I need to do this. So that is my very cute ADHD friendly, give us a kick over the bum, because we love a deadline, don't we?
It's the false deadline, isn't it? The false deadline.
It's the best. So I would like to just ask you, I know you've been doing this training. Are there any kind of resources or signposts, not anything like that you could share with our listeners?
Yeah, and so there's a few things really, and I suppose it's worth talking about this, why someone would want a diagnosis and how you could get one.
Yeah, really good
And
point.
what happens if you get one, and what's the benefits to
Yeah.
getting one. And so essentially you're going to need, if you want to explore medication, you would have to have a diagnosis from a psychiatrist, whether on the NHS or private. And but also, if you get an official diagnosis, you can access support. There's support available, and there's I don't know what we call it. It's not a business. I don't know what you call it, Maddie. There's a place that offers support for people with ADHD called Access to Work. It's
Yes.
connected to the government, kind of. I can't, I don't know what we would
An
describe it as, really.
organisation, do we call
An
it?
organisation,
Yeah,
but it is slightly connected to like the councils and stuff and the government. But this gives coaching and also like equipment to people with ADHD and autism. Grants for coaching. I've coached people through this scheme. They've paid me to coach hairdressers with ADHD. But it also gives people things like Remarkables, the Loop headphones, like you get grants to buy all that stuff. And so diagnosis means you can access support. And so that's another good reason to do it. But if you were just wanting to know, but you're not really interested in meds or, anything like that, or you're maybe not even in a position you've been sat on a wait list for ages and you're not in a position to go private, there's a company that I work with called Aspire. They're based in the north. I think it's in Leeds or Sheffield. And I've done some training with them, and these people are fantastic. And they actually do this thing called a pre-diagnosis.
Oh, cool.
It's about £300, which compared to a private diagnosis is a lot less.
Yeah.
And these people they call it a pre-diagnosis because they're not psychiatrists. They do the same training as the diagnostic people, but they just can't sign it off. Yeah. And so often people, if you're like, I just want to know, you can go and get a diagnostic assessment from them, and they go through all the neurodiversity things. So they're testing ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, your sensory things. You can find out, how you're masking. It's a really in-depth assessment. But when your assessment comes up, you can, if you want to wait, you could take that with you and be like, here, I've already had this done. And so if you literally just want to know for peace of mind, or so that you can just decide to manage it yourself, I think they're a great resource. And so we'll drop them into the show notes. There's also a book that's been recommended, and if you're watching the video, you can see me looking for it on my shelf. It's called Finally Focused, by a guy called James Greenblatt. And this book was really recommended to me about how people might manage ADHD without medication.
Yeah, we can stick
so that's a good resource for people.
Yeah, if we think of any in the show notes, we can pop them in, because I've got a couple as well. Well, that leads us... Oh, well, the other thing is, before you forget, you're going to be doing something, aren't you, on ADHD?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm currently procrastinating on writing my ADHD course. Yeah, I decided I'm putting something together for specific, my what I always do is take my psychology therapy training and make it specifically for hairdressers. And so I've been recently doing some training all around ADHD so I could understand it more. And I want to figure out how to help hairdressers very specifically with ADHD. And so, I'm putting a course together. I think realistically, that'll be ready 2024.
Yeah.
Early 2024.
We'll watch this space. I'm excited.
That's where my brain is at the minute, working on it. It's percolating in the background, Maddie, I've done all the training. I know all this stuff. And now I've got to think about how I'm going to put it together. So I'm sitting on that for a little bit until I'm really clear. But it's coming together.
I'm buzzing. I can't wait. Exactly what the industry needs, and no better person to deliver it than you. So I'm very
thank you
thrilled.
so much.
This takes
I think
us-
it's important sometimes that you understand the experience to teach it. I mean, I think that's what hairdressers have often said to me when I go into salons is when I go and talk to them about mental health, they're like, oh, you get it. Not just some dry person talking about mental health. And I hope the same will come for the ADHD course. You know, I was a hairdresser with ADHD, even though I didn't know it.
Yeah.
I have ADHD, and you know, I coach people with ADHD a lot now, and now I know a lot more about. I was really good at coaching people with ADHD before. I didn't. I'm just like, isn't that funny?
Isn't that wild? You're like, oh,
I was just naturally good.
Yeah, wondering why.
I was like, oh, I've got a strategy for that. But now, yeah, I know some more stuff, and so yeah, I want to bring that to the hair industry to help. I think that what I've discovered is a lot of people that come to me for coaching because they're overwhelmed, they've got ADHD, and they don't realise.
Yeah, that's the experience I've had as well with a lot of people that I've worked with. It just it makes sense if in the kind of greater context of like what their day-to-day life looks like and feels like. Shall we do current hyperfocus? You can start.
Yes. Yes. So my current hyperfocus is ADHD, Maddie.
Again, very meta. I love it.
Yeah, you know, I'm really diving into the symptoms, reading more about it, listening to people's experiences. I'm sort of obsessing generally about it so that I can produce something really of good quality that's reliable. And so I'm a bit obsessed with that at the moment, and reading about it and planning that, and yeah, just generally thinking about it a lot and how I can get more information and stuff like that. So that's my obsession at the minute. What's yours?
Mine, thank God, it's a very positive one, because quite often they're not the most conducive to a healthy life, i.e. when I'm eating TikTok garlic breads every day. Which I still am. My current hyperfocus is I got a walking pad, which is a bit like a treadmill. You can't really run in it, but you can walk quite fast.
I used to have one of these.
And I absolutely love it because I rebranded what was laziness, as in when you have ADHD, a lot of people will perceive that to be lazy. I've now rebranded it as efficiency. So I'll instead go, how can I get as many things done on top of each other? So for example, if I'm at the gym, I'll be listening to a podcast, or when I'm driving, I listen to a podcast. So I'm like learning things, or, you know, I do this quite a lot. So now I can watch TV. I can watch my comedies, my mindless comedies, and I'm also getting my steps in. So that's, thank God, it's a good one, a positive one. So that's me just trotting about in my house. In my dream, I've got a riser desk in my office, is to lift everything up and be walking while I'm at the office.
Yes. Well, I had a walking pad, Maddie.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've ever had this conversation, but I had one because when I worked from home as a hairdresser towards the end of my career, and my back was really bad, and my osteopath told me I needed to walk. And so I used to have a walking pad downstairs, and when my clients were processing, I used to walk on it.
See, this is the efficiency that we love to see. That's amazing.
Yeah, that was the only way. And I found it, but I'll tell you what happened to me was it used to send my Netflix off. So I used to try and do it while I was watching the TV, but it used to make my TV buffer. And so I found that was really sad, really. So that got sold on eBay a couple of years ago when my back got better. And my dream was to be well enough to get a Peloton, and I've just bought that. So that will be my new obsession.
I was going to say, I can't wait to hear that work its way into hyperfocus in the week next time. Wonderful.
Yes.
Well, that's it, I think. Is that everything for ADHD?
I think that's us. Fabulous. I'm sure something will come to us afterwards, because that's the beauty of ADHD, but we'll put it in another episode.
We'll do a part 2. We'll do a next bit when we've remembered all the things we're going to say. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hayley. Thank you so much, listeners. Go and check out the show notes. Thank you so much, Timely, and we will see you next week.
See you next week, Maddie. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments.
Please support those who support us, and check out Timely, who we recommend as our favourite booking system for you. New customers can get 50% off their first 3 months with the code COFFEE50.